الأستاذ شافه.
كلش تمام، بس حاول يقله خليه يستعجل بالدخول.
تمام. أبادر جاهز؟
إن شاء الله. نعم
أبادر إن شاء الله. يلا بس يدخل إن شاء الله. لاحظ أنا راح أبلش أراسل بالجروبات، بالجروب مال الشابتر الأساسي عن مود يبلشون. عمود شوفني أمتى تبلش. هسه أول ما يدخل بلش وياه بالأسئلة العادية مالتنا، بعدين من تتفقون كلش أقول لك بلش وياه.
إن شاء الله.
نشوف منشن بلش وياه.
راح يدخل الأستاذ، راح أقبله. لغى الطلب.
انضاف.
Good evening, Doctor, and welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Sorry, your mic is closed. Try to open your mic, Doctor.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, assalamu alaikum. Good evening.
I can hear you. So, before we admit the attendees, I just want to quickly check a few details with you. So, will you be sharing the presentation from your own screen, or would you like us for you?
Yeah, I can share. I can do the sharing from my side.
Okay, that's good. And also, I want to ask about the flow of the session. Would you prefer it to be interactive or not?
Yeah, sure. Whenever anyone has a question or like something to clarify, something to like who needs like feedback, please interrupt me and we can discuss. Yes, interactive is way better than just being one-sided.
Okay, we get that. Also, so I will at the beginning, I will do a quick introduction of the session, state the ground rules for the audience, read your biography exactly as it is, and then I will hand you the microphone. So, can we start now?
Yeah, sure. I'm here. Like, if you all joined, then yes, please. Yeah.
So, before we share the session, can you present the lecture?
Yes.
Okay, we can see that here. That's so good.
So you guys can see the full screen now, or?
Yes, we can see it. We can see the full screen of your presentation.
And like this, you see the second slide?
Yes, I see the second slide.
Okay, good, okay.
We will share the link for the attendees. So give us a minute. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's session. Before we begin, I'm Abadar Abdullah, a student in Control and Automation Technologies Engineering Department, and I will be the moderator for today's session. So, welcome again in our session today, making CCUS work in unconventional geochemistry, fracturing, and storage, organized by the IKBUOG student chapter, and also which will be presented by Dr. Muhammad Abdullah. Now, it's an absolute honor to introduce our special guest speaker for today. He is a postdoctoral fellow at KAUST, holding a PhD from Texas A&M University. He holds a master's degree from Polytechnic University of Turin, Italy. He brings extensive experience as a reservoir engineer in both the United States and Europe. His research focuses on the energy-carbon mineral nexus, including CO2 injection and carbon storage. So, to ensure a smooth session, please keep your microphones and cameras turned off at all times, unless you are explicitly given a permission to speak. Also, an attendance, a certificate will be provided by our chapter itself, BOUG IK student chapter. So be sure to fill the link. We'll send it later in the chat box. And also, before we begin, the session will be interactive. So if you have any question or inquire, you can just ask the doctor and he will be answering you. So the mic is yours. You can now start the session.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be with you guys today, and it's good to know you all. And today I'm going to talk about CCUS and making it work in unconventionals, combining some of the, let's say, or seeing it from different aspects that might serve the unconventional energy resources by utilizing geochemistry and using CCUS in fracturing and also storage. This is like a disclaimer that I have to give. So like all the views that are in this presentation are mine and not associated with my current or previous employers. So in order to like pave the way for our presentation, we must understand what is the bigger picture. So the bigger picture is that our planet is suffering from global warming, And the cause for that are the greenhouse gases, these anthropogenic CO2 emissions. So we are facing some challenges to limit or reduce such emissions, but at the same time avoid any energy crisis like what Europe is facing, and integrating more of the renewable energy resources. So if you can see can you see my cursor on the screen? So yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as I said, we're facing some energy challenges, and the energy outlook right now for our future is seeing that we will still be relying on fossil fuels like oil and natural gas, and a bit less of coal until, let's say, 2040, 2050. From my perspective, they are going to be they will stick with us a bit longer than this, because that's what we have the infrastructure for, and that's what we have, let's say, the vast experiences in. But CCUS has evolved in the past few years as a way to still rely on oil and gas, but limit the emissions. And we must know the terminology. So when it comes to CCUS, it's carbon capture, utilization, and storage. That's like this bathtub is like all the CO2 emissions. So in order to do CCUS, or CCUS is doing, is that limiting more and more CO2 to enter this bathtub, which is our atmosphere. But on the other side, CDR, which is carbon dioxide removal, is regarding removing of the existing CO2 emissions that are in the atmosphere, which have all the negative impacts upon global warming and the shift in the climate, and etc. Yeah, amazingly, CO2, and there has been a research on CO2 and CO2 EOR and CO2 storage. I believe CO2 EOR started since around 1940s in the US. So we have been injecting CO2 in the subsurface for quite a long time. So CO2 is the only employee that can work 3 jobs and never leaves, because we can utilize CO2 for EOR, enhanced oil or enhanced gas recovery. And at the same time, CO2, when it's injected in the subsurface for storage, there are many storage, let's say, or trapping mechanisms. So one of these is that CO2 will be unlocked as a mineral or as a rock, which is now we reduce the CO2 from the atmosphere. And the third one, which is emerging right now, and we have been honored to push the literature on this during my PhD, is that using CO2 to in situ leach critical minerals, so that we can produce critical minerals, lithium, copper, nickel, at the surface without the typical, let's say, mining technique. So when it comes, as I mentioned, to trapping mechanism, because we have to make sure that this CO2 is contained in the subsurface. So there are 4 typical trapping mechanisms, which are, the first one is the structural trapping mechanism, which relies on the lower permeability of the cap rock, which is like the seal of the reservoir where we inject the CO2. And there is solubility trapping, where CO2 is dissolving into the brine and going from the supercritical phase into the aqueous phase. And also there is capillary trapping, where CO2 is trapped by relative permeability and in smaller pores, so that it's it's contained within pores that has huge capillary pressure due to the small pore throat. Then CO2 is trapped. And the last one, which is the most secure one, is the mineralization or the carbon mineralization. So CO2 trapped as a rock, which, as you see here, as this scale, when CO2 reacts with the brine, being CO2 aqueous phase, and then releasing or forming the carbonic acid, which is a weak acid that naturally or automatically spontaneously dissociate into a bicarbonate and H ions, and these H ions, H plus ions, react or first reduce the or increase the acidity of the solution that induce dissolution of rocks. And as you see here, this is like magnesium silicate. So by dissolving magnesium silicate, now we are releasing like alkaline ions or cations into the aqueous phase, which is like magnesium. In other cases, this can be calcium, this can be iron. So, and then such cations like magnesium, iron, and calcium can reunite with the carbonate ions, and then forming a rock, or forming magnesium carbonate, iron carbonate, and calcium carbonate. And that's how CO2 from supercritical phase forms rock, or a trapped CO2 phase. So during my PhD, I addressed what's so-called the energy carbon mineral nexus, which is the interconnection between energy, carbon, and minerals. So there are, let's say, three pillars or three schemes here, which is first EOR, IOR, so enhanced oil recovery or improved oil recovery, to, as we said, as long as we need oil and gas still, then we need to still produce and enhance the recovery, because our population is growing and we need to provide energy. Energy is everything right now. So we need to access such untapped resources, provide this reliable energy, and improve profitability, because like no company will go into exploration and production without making a profit. But at the same time, we need to make sure that such CO2 is contained, so there is safety, there is trapping, and there is groundwater containment, so that we don't, let's say, help clean the atmosphere, but pollute our groundwater, which is everything that we rely on for agriculture and drinking. And at the same time, doing utilization, which is, okay, now we need also to utilize the CO2 for critical minerals extraction. So addressing the first pillar, and it's regarding enhanced oil and gas. And as I said, this has been in the literature for quite, let's say, for 80, 70 years now. So we know that the significance of a specific, let's say, formation, which is carbonate formations, is that carbonate formations have or present nearly 70% of oil and gas reservoirs all over the globe. These reservoirs are naturally fractured, so that, as you see here, these rocks have a matrix which is really tight, very low permeability, and a fracture which provide the conduits for the fluid to flow through. So this is from UAE, this is from Argentina. So most of the carbonates in the subsurface, like we can say, majority is naturally fractured. But also these reservoirs, carbonate reservoirs, have like Ghawar field in Saudi Arabia, which is the biggest oil reservoir all over the world. And North Field, which is in Qatar, that's the biggest gas field in the world. And also such carbonate formations provide the biggest source of oil and gas also in Iraq, where you guys stand today. So as I said, these are dual porosity. So we have a matrix which is mainly providing the containment of the oil and gas, and the fracture where permeability is provided. But these reservoirs suffer from rapid decline in the production, and that's due to early breakthrough of gas, of gas in oil reservoirs, and early breakthrough of water in gas reservoirs. So now there is competition, and there is a decline in production. And also the matrix, which has most of the oil and gas, is really low permeability. So we need to enhance the permeability for this. As I said, EOR has evolved from using gas injection. So now we have a dual system in the subsurface, a very low permeability matrix and a very high permeability fracture. So we need to limit this huge discrepancy so that we can improve the production or have the ultimate production. So we started, or the industry started, using gas injection so that in order to improve the oil production. But still, there is a huge difference in density. So gas will reside on the top part of the reservoir, and we have gravity override. And also the discrepancy in viscosity make viscous fingering and gas channeling if we have heterogeneity, which is mainly the fracture. So in the fractures, if we do gas injection, mainly the gas will flow in the fracture and leave the matrix. So we did nothing. And then the industry started implementing water. So now water alternating gas, so that to confirm the mobility. And afterwards, also to confirm the mobility further, the industry used foam. So now we have water and surfactants to have foam, so that we have this sweep efficiency, not leaving something behind, no, sweeping the reservoir from the injector towards the producer. So one of the studies that we did with collaborations with University of Wyoming and Khalifa University was using CO2 foam, huff and buff, in fractured carbonates. And we used CO2 and a surfactant, a zwitterionic surfactant, and we used 70% foam quality. And then we tested 2 cores. Both cores, we cannot define these as tight, because the unfractured permeability is 30 millidarcy and 200 on the other case. But still, we have a matrix and we have a fracture. So in one case, the matrix is 5x permeability. In another case, the matrix is around 4x permeability. But this core A is more tighter than core B, having a permeability of 30 versus 200. So we used CO2 foam to enhance the recovery from these saturated cores. And as you see here, these are the 2 fractures, and then recombining the 2 pieces of the rock and having a fracture in between and wrapping them with Teflon, and then having the experiment under 2000 psi and 90 degrees C. And in here you see what the gas injection did, versus the recovery, and then having foam injection, and even having 1 cycle and 2 cycle of huff and buff, where we close the production, inject and raise the pressure, and then open the production, where CO2 can then diffuse from the low matrix going into the fracture and then remobilizing some of the oil and gas towards the fracture and then producing. So it's mainly, as I said, having foam which increase the viscosity where the gas doesn't shoot through the fracture. No, there will be like foam particles here that have a resistance to flow, forcing the fluid to go into the matrix and then enhancing the recovery. But after doing such study, like I did some research and then seeing, but what if the other, or what about the other part of the carbonates, which like here, this study from Iraq published in 2015, where such formation, the Comitan formation in North Iraq, the carbonates are majorly not fractured. And as you see here, these are the only samples that are the fractured petrophases, but all these are not fractures, and the permeability even goes to 1/10,000 millidarcy. So these are very tight rocks. So at this case, we cannot inject such foam because now we will have huge resistance to injectivity, and we need to fracture the reservoir. And here where acidizing or stimulation comes into play. But such techniques, they have like high cost associated with, and acids can induce some corrosive environment and have some environmental risk. And also any stimulation needs to have huge treatment pressures. So we did a study, and as you see here, CO2 can even induce some dissolution or rock dissolving characteristics and reducing the geochemical stability of the reservoir to induce fractures in the subsurface at normal injection pressures. And as we see here, when we inject the CO2, we've seen that CO2 created some vugs on the core that you see here on my on the cursor. And at the same time, when we produced the brine that we injected, we have seen elevated concentrations of critical minerals like nickel and zinc and copper. So now we can enhance porosity and enhance permeability by injecting the CO2, even at like sub-fracture pressures. And if we go to higher pressures, this will have further attractiveness, and at the same time leach some critical minerals. So we've done some batch reactions first, where we have the rock in a static reactor and let the rock react with a brine, synthetic brine, and CO2 injected, and then characterize the rock before and after. And also we did flow experiments, like core flooding experiments. And as you see here, we've seen that's the pristine core, or the core before the reaction, and that's the core after the reaction, where we have seen many vugs and fractures that you see here has been done due to the acidity of the CO2 and the dissolution of the glauconite, which is a type of mica that is contained in this carbonate rock. And also here we've seen a fracture. As you see, this is the rock after the experiment, and this is the rock before the experiment. So having a fracture, now we can enhance the permeability of this tight rock. Also, we've seen some changes regarding the precipitation of some minerals, like here anchorite, which is a calcium, magnesium, iron carbonate, which are these orange like tans on the rock surface. And surprisingly, we've seen that some pristine carbonate formations, they have such megascopic nature, which is the VUG fracture, VUG and VUG fracture cavity. And amazingly, we can see that CO2 injection can produce such behavior in the rock at such low pressures, which is like 74 bar. So by this, we can enhance the porosity and permeability. And then, yeah, these are all pictures of how the rock looked after and before. And here is the quantification of having a CT scan of the rock before and after to define the porosity. And defining the porosity in CT scan in carbonates is a bit tricky because we can have nanopores and like submicro pores that cannot be detected at low resolution. So we have to go further in higher resolution. But even at such resolution, we have seen an increase in porosity. And even under the microscope, we've seen some precipitation of the iron over the surface of the rock, which comes from the dissolution of the glauconite, which the CO2 has induced. And we have also seen some parts where now the solution is not or hasn't been touched with the solution yet. So it's like a dynamic process of CO2 acidity that attack the rock matrix and dissolve the mineral. Also producing the brine sample and having this brine sample at ambient temperature, we have seen that also there is like a carbonate scale, as you see here. And under the microscope, this carbonate scale is a magnesium-rich calcite, which is now that's where you see with your eyes how the CO2 can be formed or can be converted into a scale or a rock carbonate. Having the...
Sorry, sir, I have a question. Can I ask?
Yeah, sure.
Sir, when you said like cycle CO2 like injection to increase the reaction time and the area, like isn't like injection like repeat injection will cause soaking of the cycle, and repeated use of injection will increase like the dissolution of the carbonate mixture?
Okay, so you refer to the foam huff and puff one?
Yes, the one with the injection.
It's here?
I think, yep.
Yeah. So yes, so to answer your question is, yeah, at the soaking cycles, at this, so we start with gas injection and then we follow with foam injection. But in order to increase the recovery beyond the foam cycle, we close the production. So we have this huff and puff. So huff is that where you inject and then the production side is closed, and then you increase the pressure at the injection because the production is closed to some extent where the foam will be forced, or the gas from the foam particles will be forced at the interface. So foam will be here, the pressure will be higher, the foam particles will collapse at this interface between the fracture and the tight matrix, and gas will imbibe. So gas going into reorganizing the distribution of the hydrocarbons and then driving the hydrocarbons in or ahead of the flow. Now, when you buff or like when you open the production, you will have a huge increase of the production. And then it plateaus. So you do another cycle of close, raise the injection or raise the pressure, leave it for some time, and then open.
So like the repeated injection will not cause like dissolution of the carbonate, like any loss of the carbonate itself?
Okay, so yes, geochemically, when CO2 dissolves into the brine, increasing the acidity, it will dissolve the carbonate. But to what extent is another question because of geochemistry. So, for example, if you look at the dissolution rate of dolomite in pH 4.8 or 5, or even like 4.5, which is the normal brine pH of like a brine having a fugacity of CO2 under 74 bar. So having this pH of 4.5, 4.8, dolomite will not dissolve up to like a considerable amount or not dissolve at all. Calcite, yes, it will dissolve, but of course it's based on your like scale, but you can see like minimal dissolution of calcite. But if you have clays and some certain types of mica, then you will have dissolution. And that's what made this second study. So here, this dissolution is due to this mica, which is glauconite, serving as like a cement between grains. And we can talk a lot regarding this and where it forms, how it was formed under millions of years. But these minerals have higher dissolution rate, which means under this 1 day of our experiment, you will have such vugs. But having calcite and dolomite, yes, calcite will dissolve, but it will take further time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope now it's clear. And that's why I'm calling it the nexus. So there is a huge interconnection between mineralogy, geochemistry, and the rock. So it's very complex, subhanallah. So I believe we were, at this. As you see here, and this also can answer a bit of your question. So if you look, we have the brine composition analyzed after having this rock under CO2-rich environment, let's say, or CO2-rich brine for 1 day. And we can see that there is increase in magnesium concentration, which can come from dolomite, but in our case, it comes from this glauconite because the glauconite has Mg, which is mainly like Mg iron silicate. And we can have, and also we have here and like increase in calcium concentration. So now we have calcite dissolution. We have iron, which comes from glauconite, and we have potassium, which only comes from glauconite. But surprisingly, we have also increase in nickel and copper and zinc and manganese, and at less extent, chromium. So we induced leaching of such critical minerals that now countries fight on under this small time scale experiment, which can open some routes if you guys want to go into research. So the findings are CO2 can even induce fracturing at sub-fracture pressure. And it can displace the gases absorbed by desorption and adsorption. So desorption of the methane and adsorption of the CO2. So now there is like a competition. And also it can be stored as carbonate. But there is a bit of trickiness here because CO2 will be the connected phase. So you have to make sure this CO2 will not migrate to other formations. So this opens the second route, which is the assisted fracturing. So we know that there is this shale revolution that happened in the US and boomed around 2014, where like now the US is the biggest producer and has been the biggest producer of oil and gas, or if I'm not wrong, for 2 or 3 years, as far as I remember. So, and this is done by fracturing, where they induce hydraulic fracturing or fracture the rock in the subsurface, which is really tight, and then produce. But what about using CO2 that can, let's say, replace a bit of the brine roll, or what's so-called slick water, and then induce such fractures by the CO2 itself, and having this dissolution or the pH gain, and at the same time provide critical minerals and increase the, let's say, the recovery of energy, because now we need to fuel not only the population, but also data centers. So we need electricity to have this AI surviving around us, which is now becoming a pillar of our life. So CO2 stimulation is not that new. It has been for quite, let's say, maybe we can say like 20 years, something like this. And there are quite some examples in the US, Williston Basin in East Texas. In Kuwait, 2 or 3 years ago, a tight carbonate has been fractured by CO2, I believe by Schlumberger. And now do you call it the premium stimulation strategy for such rocks? And I believe there is a huge potential here in the Middle East. And we have a paper on this that's coming up. And also there has been another example in China. So it's dispersed, but at this moment is not very, let's say, it's not implemented at a large scale. Slick water is constitute the bigger portion of stimulation jobs due to some limitations. So in order to understand how CO2 can enhance such stimulation, we have done modeling by a US-based simulator, RISFRAC. And it's a very good simulator that you can use to model completions or fractures in the subsurface. And we've used one of the published stimulation jobs by Equinor in the Williston Basin. And the Williston Basin, they produce mainly from the Middle Bakken and the Three Forks, and these are the names of the formations. As I said, the scale of unconventionals in the US is tremendous. Like you cannot believe when you fly over the Permian Basin in Texas, how many wells that are there. I think you guys can see this also in Iraq. I've never been to, but it's huge how many wells are needed to provide such energy. So as I said, we tried to understand how CO2 will affect the stimulation job. And here you can see the production profile, the pressure profile. So these are clusters. So stages, each stage has certain clusters. Each cluster is with such perforation. And you can see here the pressure response after a certain time, which is, I believe, 1 year here after the stimulation. So we draw the fluid back into the well. And the aperture, which is the opening of the fracture, and also the CO2 storage, or how much mass fraction of CO2 is still trained or trapped, still attained in the reservoir. So like it's quite well that CO2 stimulation is now doubling the stimulated area. So we have a larger stimulated area when we use CO2 as a pre-pad. So just to fracture the rock with CO2 and then follow with the slick water and proppant. and also doubled the permeability of the fracture or the conductivity. So, and which is really important because we have to have like any increase in permeability, that's less resistance to flow, and this will reflect the production. And also, when it comes to production, modeling only one stage, we can see 6% increase in gas and 4% increase in oil. You can see these are, yes, they are limited in numbers, but every barrel counts. And when it comes to fracking wells, you spend expenditure, or you need some capex to do drill and then frack. So if you can enhance your productivity, then you will enhance also the economics part. So this can be translated into some quite profit. Here is also how amazing we can track CO2 fraction, the aperture throughout the production cycle and the production and the reservoir pressure by doing simulation. As I said first, that these will be snippets. So if anything needs further verification or further discussion, you are free to reach out to me. And at this point, we have to address some very important aspect, which is the safety, because we're talking CO2. So we have to make sure that the CO2 running pipelines through your backyard, having as much of CO2 injected into the subsurface. This is a bit hazard when it comes to CO2 pipelines, because CO2 is acidificant. So if it's released, then it displaces oxygen. It can lead to suffocation, and it happened in this case in Satartia, Mississippi, I believe around 2022, 2021, where a collapse in the ground due to rain or something has made the CO2 pipeline rupture, and CO2 volumes have been released into the atmosphere. So in order to address this, we need to also have some safety guidelines for, okay, if something like this happen, how far the CO2 bloom can reach. And I believe this is more addressing the chemical engineering part, which is now we have CFD, computational fluid dynamics, and we have the safety or the process safety side of it, of how far the CO2 dangerous concentration can reach, so that we can guide how far the emergency planning, if such event happens, we need to evacuate people up to this radius or this meter. So we've done an interesting study doing some mini simulations that covers different temperature of CO2 that runs through the pipeline, pressure, and the leak diameter of the pipeline. And then to understand how far the CO2 dangerous concentration, which is 30,000 ppm, which is the STEL range, or the 40,000 ppm, which is IDLH, which is immediately dangerous to life and health. And then we coded it by machine learning and had this interactive tool where you can enter the temperature of the CO2, the leak size in this pipeline or this injection well, and the pressure of the CO2 that runs through. And then you can predict how far this exclusion zone, so how far you have to evacuate. And in this case, it's 600 meters. We participated in the yearly convention or SPE data science competition, and gratefully we won some the first award. And the last piece of the presentation is now also we need to, if we store the CO2 in subsurface formations, we can also leach some lithium from some certain rocks, which is here the biotite, a type of mica, where the CO2 acidity can induce the lithium dissolution from this rock. So if we also address the CCUS, there is the CMG, the computer modeling group. They have a very nice simulator where you can assess CO2 injection and then track the CO2 for 100 years, 1,000 years, and seeing how far the CO2 bloom will migrate, how safe it is, how much minerals of the CO2 or how much of the CO2 will turn into mineral, etc. So we did a study here having an aquifer. So this is no oil, just an aquifer, a reservoir that has only brine, and then injecting the CO2 and then monitoring the CO2 for 100 years. And as you see here, when we inject the CO2, this is the distribution of the CO2 that turns into rock, which is the mineral trapping that we talked about. And that's how much the CO2 or the distribution of the CO2 that will be trapped by capillary pressure or the hysteresis, where you like these cycles of water injection and then the CO2 movement, and also the dissolution trapping, where the CO2 will be dissolved into the brine and locked as aqueous phase. And that's how far the bloom is migrating, because you need to limit the upward movement of your CO2, because CO2, like there is a buoyancy effect here. It's less heavier than this brine, then the CO2 will move upwards, and you need a capillary, a cap rock. So like a very low permeability rock where CO2 injection will not diffuse and then escape, because if it escapes, then some problems will happen even sooner or later. And then CO2, as it dissolves into the brine, this brine density will be heavier, and then this heavier brine will go downward. So it's a dynamic process. As I said, nature is not very simple, and so we are still evolving into understanding. And in order to quantify, so now we see that, okay, residual trapping or this trapping by hysteresis contributes as this, how much of 1,000 tons, like 71,000 tons of CO2 will be trapped in this case. And then, or in order to see it as percentages, now we have like structural trapping, which is by the tight cap rock, is around 37%. 24% will be as residual trapping. And then as aqueous phase or dissolution is around 33%, and around 5% of the CO2 has turned into rock after only 100 years in this case. So now there is this, like, okay, now we can quantify how much each trapping mechanism contribute into the game. And this is interesting because if we target formations that has biotite or mica or clays, now we can have more and more of mineral trapping, because these are reactive rocks that react faster enough than normal silicates so that it can induce mineral trapping, but also they have or portions of such clays and mica under certain locations in the world, they have considerable lithium concentration. So if these formations came into contact with such acidic solution as the CO2-rich brine, now we can have for leaching of lithium. So if you guys look into future, then you certainly can go for doing further experiments or having or doing further simulation that can take experiments under short time up to 100 years, 1,000 years. But still, also companies are now starting to go and do pilot testing of CO2 fracturing, for example, and CO2 EOR is also expanding in conventionals and going a little bit now into unconventionals, or at least the gas injection. And when it comes to utilizing the minerals that are now as like mining wastes, also we can use CO2 to leach or use such mining waste to release the critical minerals that are retained in such minerals. Excuse me. So this kind of like summarize the CO2 game, or the pattern that this presentation has addressed the CO2 to unlock the hydrocarbon, store the carbon or the CO2 as mineral, and also induce leaching of critical minerals. So I would like, of course, to thank Texas A&M and KAUST for sponsoring my work during my PhD and now during my postdoc, and RISFRAC and CMG for providing the academic license, and my groups at Texas A&M and all the labs that I've worked with. And thank you.
Okay, thank you, Doctor, so much. Thank you for your absolutely brilliant and insightful presentation. We are getting time and your experience. And also thank you everyone for your great questions. And once again, a huge thank you to our speaker for this wonderful lecture. And don't forget to fill the link in the chat box to get your certificates. Also, before the end, if anyone still had a question, you can ask now.
Yes, please. Thank you guys for your attention. I hope it was useful and it can guide or inspire any of you. And I wish you the best.
Thank you. All thanks is for you, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if there is no questions or further questions, then I wish you guys a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, the link now is in the chat box, so you can fill it and get your certificate.